So let's talk about what makes the fearful avoidant attachment style partner, aka the hot and cold partner, attracted to other people when it comes to dating and relationships. So if you're not already familiar with this channel, I put out daily content on the subconscious mind, attachment styles, relationships, and communication boundaries, all the things that we need in order to really thrive at relationships. And if you're not familiar with attachment styles, the fearful avoidant is one of four major attachment styles, which is basically a love style in relationships. And when we don't know our attachment style, I often compare not knowing your attachment style to trying to play a board game with somebody who has a different set of rules than somebody else. And you can only imagine how much unnecessary friction and confusion would happen if we have a different set of rules and yet we're trying to play the same board game. And really, relationships are like that for us. We tend to have this different subconscious set of rules for how to do relationships and what to expect. And when we have a different attachment style, it causes a lot of unnecessary confusion. So if this is something you're looking to learn more about and learning to really thrive in relationships, consider subscribing to this channel. I create a daily breakthrough video for you on here. So the fearful avoidant attachment style, as I mentioned, is the hot and cold partner. They tend to be the person in relationships who often gives mixed messages. They may go from being super emotionally available and very present to being kind of dismissive and pulled back. And they can really be, in that swinging pendulum, really all in one day and really doubtful about the relationship or who they're dating the next. And this largely comes from the way that they were conditioned growing up, where they tended to have a lot of really good associations to love, but also a lot of scary associations to love and connection and what that all meant. So when it comes to the fearful avoidance, something that's really interesting, if you recognize this style in yourself or somebody else, is that the fearful avoidant tends to be attracted to things that they are kind of disconnected from in the relationship to themselves. And this is a very common thing. It's actually one of three major features that drives attraction, that actually creates what we feel and experience as attraction on a daily basis in life. And what this means essentially is we are constantly looking for trait variety. If you imagine that thousands of years ago, you paired up with somebody in the wild and you tried to survive, and this person was really smart and you were really strong. If you pair up together, you have a better sense or a better chance of surviving. And so essentially, on a biological level, this drive is still there for us. And so we tend to be very attracted to people who are expressing the traits within us that we are disconnected from. In other words, if you grew up in an environment like a fearful avoidant does, where it's often unsafe to have boundaries or to say no, because maybe you get punished or in trouble or love is withheld or things like that, often you'll give up your boundaries to adapt to your environment. And then what'll happen is that assertiveness trait that you've disconnected from might be something that's very attractive to you in other people. Now, fearful avoidance specifically, yes, they can be assertive, but fearful avoidants tend to only be assertive when they're really angry and when they essentially have really not been assertive and had a hard time being assertive many times. And then eventually they become angry and they kind of use their anger as a form of assertiveness. But anyways, we'll start with assertiveness as trait number one. So fearful avoidance, because they're usually disconnected from that ongoing assertiveness, when somebody else expresses assertiveness or is good with their boundaries or has no problem saying no about something to a boss or asks for their needs assertively, often fearful avoidants find that very attractive because it's a trait within themselves that they've had to push down or disconnect from. So this tends to be something that really draws them in. Now, at the end of this video too, by the way, we're going to talk about how these same traits that we're initially really attracted to can actually be the exact things that cause devastation and turmoil in the relationship later on, and why this happens and what you can do about it. So the second major trait that tends to really draw fearful avoidance in is vulnerability. When fearful avoidants see somebody express vulnerability, they tend to be really drawn into that. And if somebody is being too emotionally dependent on the fearful avoidant, that can cause them to push away, yes. But initial vulnerability, opening up, being very sweet and open, and that sort of innocence, that like true vulnerability that somebody expresses, again, that can be something that because the fearful avoidance disconnected in within themselves and they struggle to often be truly vulnerable with others. They usually have their guard up and they're good at getting people to open up and being vulnerable to them, but they tend to be a little more guarded internally. When somebody expresses that vulnerability, it's kind of like bees to honey. Like they tend to feel like drawn in and want to be there and care for the vulnerability of another person. And so that tends to be something that really causes them to feel drawn to somebody. Now, if you want to do a deep dive, by the way, into like a lot more understanding of trait integration and attraction and all these different things, we actually have a free trial. It closes, I believe, tomorrow. And it's 14-day free trial for all of the courses we have at PDS. But you can start with, if you're really looking to get into like attraction and trait work, you can go into how to master the dating stage of relationships, or you can even go into the how to master every stage of a relationship with the fearful avoidance specifically. And it will talk about in both of those courses, and you'll see them in the dashboard if you just search them. Attraction, connection, healthy communication, what drives attraction. You'll learn about different traits and how to really integrate those traits. And yeah, it's just a powerful course for having a really big breakthrough in relationships quickly by understanding what you want and what you need, and also what other people are looking for in relationships. It just kind of opens your eyes to see that and understand connection from a different lens. So again, you can check that out for free for 14 days using the link below. Now, the third major trait that tends to really draw fearful avoidance in is people who are very self-assured. I find that as a general rule, fearful avoidants are not self-assured. They can be very strong and they can be very courageous, and they can take big action. But I wouldn't say that comes from a self-assured place. In fact, fearful avoidants are generally second guessing themselves a lot. One day they're like, I'm all into this relationship. Another day they're like, I don't know if I should be in this relationship. One day they're like, I'm going to go in this direction with the job that I want. And then the next day they're like, oh, I don't know if I really want that job. And they tend to really go back and forth and be quite sort of indecisive and ungrounded in their decisions and how they feel about themselves and their lives. And that can also impact their self-esteem. One day they can feel confident, the next day they can feel really down in the dumps. And again, a lot of this actually comes as a result of a trauma response. And it's usually dating all the way back to fearful avoidance upbringing and the way they were taught to deal with situations where there were kind of polarities and big extremes, where like one day maybe they had a really great experience with their parents or caregivers, and another day maybe there was turmoil and chaos. And so they tend to experience a lot of that swinging back and forth in their personality because their personality has been so conditioned by their environment, as with every single other person and attachment style. And so a lot of those polarities in what they saw and experienced growing up tend to translate into a lot of polarities within the relationship to themselves. And so what you'll see is that sense of being self-assured and consistent in terms of how they feel, what they think, tends to actually be moving around a lot and tends to be very inconsistent. And so that will be a trait that they're very drawn to in others. They tend to be really drawn to people who are self-assured, are consistent, are very grounded. And those traits tend to be very attractive to a fearful avoidant. Now, here's the really interesting part. And it's that what we tend to originally be so attracted to, if we don't develop that healthy integration of those traits within ourselves, actually tends to be the downfall of a relationship later on, especially when we get to the power struggle stage of dating and relationships. And what I really mean by this is that, relationships are so much a tool for growth. If we are not securely attached, relationships are going to show you all of your stuff. Like it's really going to bring everything up to the surface. And that can be really challenging and it can be uncomfortable, but it can also be a fantastic opportunity for healing and deep growth. And for us to really put pieces back together if things were sort of fractured in our past experiences. And, when it comes to love and connection. And so what you'll often see, and we'll take a look at a few different examples here, is those things that you're so attracted to at the beginning can be the very things that later on you're so frustrated by and so resentful about. So let's look at some examples. Somebody who, fearful avoidance as an example tend to often be really attracted to, people tend to be really attracted to fearful avoidance when they are, novelty seeking, and they tend to like new things, and they tend to be sort of excited by different things in their environment. And that can be something that actually draws people to the fearful avoidant. But later on, often people who are dating fearful avoidance will be really frustrated by the fact that fearful avoidance don't commit as easily, or they are kind of scattered and all over the place with how they're feeling and what their commitment levels are like in the relationship. So that initial attraction around novelty can later be the thing that causes resentment. Often fearful avoidance themselves are very attracted to, like I mentioned, like people who are laid back or sort of more grounded. And then later on, the fearful avoidant can be like, hey, I don't feel like we have enough like excitement or passion, or there's not enough, novelty happening here in the relationship. And so those things originally that we're drawn to, really the trick to having a successful relationship that lasts, one of the major tricks and components is those things that you are so drawn to. We want those original polarities, but we don't want to stay in these extremes of polarity, because later that infatuation will turn into resentment and frustration and blame. And so what we have to be able to do is see in others what we have disconnected from within ourselves, and do the work to start expressing those traits. So like, let's look at one for the fearful avoidant here. Fearful avoidants are really attracted to assertiveness, and fearful avoidants have to become assertive. Otherwise, they're going to feel walked all over and taken advantage of in their relationships. Fearful avoidants are attracted to vulnerability. They have to learn to be vulnerable in their relationships, or they will constantly feel unseen and unheard and come to fear commitment and sabotage relationships. So these things that we are so drawn to in other people, we have to start recognizing and witnessing and seeing what's within us, and then taking those action steps necessary to integrate those traits and to practice becoming more of those things in our daily lives in order to see that needle move. So as I mentioned, if you want to check out a free trial, we do have a 14-day free trial. If you want to do a deep dive into trait work and attraction work around traits and integration work, and if you see these as some of your major patterns, you can also check out the shadow work course. It's like a very deep course that goes all into the subconscious mind and trait integration and trait work. And it's also very healing from a sort of like inner child or reparenting perspective. So anyways, all that stuff is available to you for 14 days for free. If you're new to this channel and you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing. Check out future other videos that we have. I put out a daily YouTube video on here for free with all kinds of content. And thank you so much for watching and for being here. I will see you in future videos, and please like and subscribe if you haven't already.